Welcome back to the channel. You're here with Nate28 and this is Crossbeats Production. Now I thought I'd do another perspective, different camera angle, and I did this for the 200 subscriber special. So pretty much this is a thank you, and it's also just a really grateful experience that I'm getting to do, sharing the information that I've got, sharing the information I've learned over the years, and being able to help you guys out and also be able to learn myself, because in teaching things you do also learn, because if you're not learning, obviously there's something wrong there. But this is definitely a great experience to help other people, and also grow in my techniques, and also get comments from other people and have questions asked and all that sort of stuff that's happening on this channel. So I got to say thank you for all you guys for tuning in, and thank you for watching, thank you for all the likes, and thank you for the comments, and keep up all the good work, because like I always say, this is part of the learning process. So I hope you appreciate the video, and remember to give the like and a thumbs up and all that good stuff, because that's definitely the helping point at this stage. So this is a video that I want to show you a couple of different things that I want to discuss. One video that I did also had some comments come back about gain staging. That's one thing I want to discuss in this particular video. And also just the process behind how I create a beat, pretty much using different tools, and also how I go about the end process and where I do my mixing, how I set my gain staging, like I said before, and the kind of things that I keep in mind when I do mix my tracks. So I'll just show you pretty much how I've got everything set up and the general process. So I've pre-worked this particular track. As you can see here, there's a track that's made in Maschine. Now I made this in Maschine standalone, and basically, there's another comment. Have to look at that in a minute. So there's this is made in Maschine standalone, so I pretty much get that, and I start the whole process of making the beat. I made this particular beat out of a sample that I found, and the sample that I used was out of a Logic sample, so Logic Pro X. It came out of there, and that's, as you know, you can use samples out of Logic. You can use samples anywhere you get them, as long as you don't have to worry about copyright. So this is a non-issue with the sample that I've used. Basically, I've just got that sample, I've manipulated it, I chopped it up into sequences, and I'll show you that in another video actually, because I don't want to go too far in depth with this, and I don't want to make it too much of a long video, but I'll try and make this at about maybe 45-minute video, and I'll try and explain as much as I can in the video. So cheers. Green tea. Right, so by the way, my studio, it's quite a small setup. I don't know if you can see much in this this video here, but the setup itself, I might do another studio setup if you want me to. It's not really anything spectacular in here, trust me. But I've just got a small corner in my garage, and I've got my speakers set up in, actually I might just grab the camera so you can see it. So I've got my speakers set up, as you can see, basically in that position. Just my studio equipment here, microphone for recording obviously, and all that stuff there. So I don't do anything too spectacular as far as insulating the noise and all that, but at the end of the day, it does the job, and you don't have to have a magic space to get some good recordings and get some good mixes. It really just comes down to learning your space. So anyway, let me just get into this, and I'll just give you guys an explanation on how this all works and what I've done here. So pretty much what I'm going to do is get the sample that I've gotten here. So I've created this sample, and I like to take it out in sections, just so I know exactly where I'm at with the sample itself. So I start with the intro obviously, and I'll just bounce that out accordingly. Obviously the tempo that I've got here is the tempo that I've set this particular track to, so that is pretty much set to tempo. Now that's just obviously a double. I might just might cut this video down a bit once I've actually done this. I just want to give you guys an idea of how I actually start my tracks out and what I do as far as that's concerned. So let me just bounce a few of these sections out, so you kind of know exactly where I'm at and what I'm doing, so you understand that. Now, pretty much what I've got set up here is well, how I've done it anyway is I had 4 different chops and I put them into different groups, so I could actually send those chops out in an order which it sounded how I wanted it to, and it ended up being really well at the end, really good. So I'm pretty sure that's the same as pattern 2, so I'll just copy that again. See, the cool thing about what I've got here is, as you can see, the marking in Maschine lines up with the marking in this track here, so you can see exactly where I'm up to. So that's kind of why, one reason why I use Maschine as a plugin inside of this Studio One 3, and that's because that, you know, using Maschine as a plugin, it kind of helps you line up your track to the grid exactly how you want to see it. I'm pretty sure that's not meant to be there, and that's just evident because it just shows you that I'm lining it up. So, you know, like I'm lining this up with the track that I've got in Studio One, and it tells me exactly where I'm at. So that's kind of really key to, I guess, process and speeding up your process of making the beat or bouncing the beat out or whatever you want to call it. So let me just play you the sample. I'll see if I can. Yeah. All right. So I might just turn that up a bit. Get rid of the browser for a second. Get rid of this and so that's the basics of that sample. The sample itself, like I said, I created that, and I can show you in another video how I actually did that, but that's for another time. So just so we can get this to go a little bit quicker, I just want to speed up some of the stuff here. So like I said, 4 chops, you can see that's all chopped up, and I've used this as an EQ. That's the actual EQ that I ended up using on the sample. Now, when I make my tracks inside of Maschine, prior to me doing this video, I did do a semi-mix to the actual track, and I found that at the end when I came back to it, it didn't sound how I wanted it to. So I pretty much took off every single plugin that I had on this, and I've left this EQ here because that EQ actually really suited the mix and how I wanted it to sound. So for an example, when you're using samples, especially if you're using a sample that has a lot of bass or low end in it, you'll notice that, especially with that kind of thing, that you're going to... Man, why does it keep doing that? Okay. You tend to want to cut out some of the low end, so that's where I've actually ended up cutting it out at 358, which is quite high for cutting out low end, but in that sense, I did bring in another bass instrument, which this has a lot of low end, and I'm still going to have to control some of the low end in this track because it's not really controlled at this stage. But anyway, let me just drop out some of these drums, and I'll just show you what they sound like so you get an idea or an indication. So let me just quickly bounce this out. And by the way, labeling your stuff is probably really key to having stuff really understandable in your mix, so I just tend to do that real quick so I know what I'm looking at later on. Like I said, I'm probably going to cut some of this out so you can see more of this and not waste too much time on all this stuff that I'm doing right now. Crap. Okay, so obviously that's number 1. Just copy that because that's the same as the original first bar. So this is the intro, then hook, and then it goes to number 2, which is the first. And I honestly don't think there's too much difference between these two, but anyway, let's just see what we've got. I don't want to mess with it too much. Okay, so I'm going to cut this short, and I'll just come back to it once I've actually got this entirely set up, and then you can see what we've got. So you kind of know exactly, anyway, what I'm doing, and this process just goes for every single instrument. Now there is another way that you can do this, just so you know. You can actually go into Maschine, and I'll just show you if I can. So when you go to export audio, you can actually export every single, if you have Maschine, by the way, you might not have it. So if you want to export it, you can export all of these in loops, and you can export them individually, and that's probably what I would normally do, but I just wanted to show you, you know, this is one way of doing it. There is other ways of doing it, like you can see there. Excuse me. That's really good. Yeah, but if I was going to do it a quick way, I'd probably export it like that and just use Maschine. Again, maybe bring it in separately as a DAW door, but not bring it in separately. I mean, as a plugin, sorry. But yeah, so anyway, let's just fast forward this, and I'll just pause this video for a second. Okay, we're back, and this is pretty much the result of bounced out project. Now, the questions that I've had about gain staging. So it's hard to say exactly what's perfect, but there's a good way to find a good result when you're gain staging, and the way that I would normally find that result is putting this into mono. So the first thing I normally do when I start to gain stage, so I guess it depends on the program that you're using to produce your beat in, and the way that you're doing that has a lot to do with the way that you'd gain stage your project and the start of that. Okay, I guess I can explain how I would normally do it. So say for example, I'll just take that out of mono for a start. Now say for example, I just put some kind of synth into my project, right? So say I'm putting this synth into my project, and I want to gain stage the way that the synth, like the way that synth is sitting with the mix. So first off, obviously that's way too loud. So I'd turn down the volume of the global volume down to what I think is appropriate. So probably about maybe -10 sounds roughly about right. So you'd have some kind of setup like that. So I guess the idea for your first gain staging and how you want to set that up is totally up to you, and how loud you want your track to be at the start. But the main key to gain staging is to remember that the low end frequencies that you're going to be putting in or introducing into your track are going to take up a lot of that space when you finally come down to mastering the track. And having that in mind, I kind of start with somewhere in the -10, -12, -14, 15. That's kind of the region where you're kind of safe. Now, when you actually had a subscriber, I think his name was Jalal, he asked me about putting VU meters on to your project and things like that. I personally don't use VU meters until it gets to the, I guess, the mixing stage. When I first start creating a track, I don't want to be stuck with having to, I guess you could do a template if you want to and create that kind of track setup if you want to for every single project. But personally, I don't like templates because I feel like they restrict my workflow, so I stay away from templates altogether. I know some people use them and it's probably working for them, but hey, that's fine if you want to do that. But using the VU meter now, I guess that's one thing you could do. So you could go into your presonus and then use VU. Now, how to read this, it's pretty simple. Now, there's a digital readout in the center, and if you can see on, like, say, I'll play this as a sample. I'll just solo that. I need to put the VU meter on the right thing, actually. So what I'd probably actually do is just remove that from there, go to this channel, and I'll just move these so they're separately done. Alright, so I pretty much would go to the post section, go down to VU meter, and select that. Now, that's if you want to use this as a metering tool. It's totally up to what you decide to do with your metering, but if you only have stock metering tools, then this is a pretty good metering tool. I'd set the scale to about -18 or -12, depending on what you want to do. That's just a good sort of scale to be set at if you're thinking in the sense of analog equipment. Now, you don't have to set this scale. If you want to set it to -12, even -6, you're welcome to do that. The only difference, I guess, that will come into play is when you're using, say for example, you get a plugin like a compressor that is analog, like the older style of compressors. So say for example you have Native Instruments as a bundle and you have the solid bus compressor. this compressor is modeled off a bus compressor, so the SSL bus compressor, and they tend to model the input gain structure of that compressor of that year when it was made. So the input, obviously the headroom that you're having in a compressor such as this is probably going to be less than you'd have in a standard compressor that comes with Studio One, and the normal compressors that come with that are just your, let me just go into it. So this compressor here, so it doesn't, this compressor doesn't have a per se headroom like the modeled compressors do. It's got a headroom that's set to this audio DAW. So pretty much, you know, your headroom's going to be a lot more in this type of compressor. So when I'm talking about headroom in compressors and stuff like that, what I'm trying to tell you is that, you know, you're only worried about gain staging and headroom when you're using analog gear, and if you're using modeled analog gear, you want to have somewhat of a gain stage that you would have with a console. Now, this isn't your standard console that you're working on. It's not a physical console, it's a digital console, so there is a lot higher headroom in that sense. So long story short, if you're using this VU meter as your gain staging tool, you'd be wanting to look for somewhere in that -18, -12. So how you read the meter is looking at this meter. It's obviously going to tell you where you're at with the levels. So if it's -18, so it's going to tell you you're about there on -18 scale. So when it's at 0 dB, you're meeting your threshold of clipping, and that would be the -18 on that scale. So sensitivity obviously just shows you how sensitive the needle is to that input signal. So it's right now, it's on the digital readout, it's telling me it's at about close to -18. So that's about where the reading is. So that's one metering tool you can use if you're happy to use that and you're confident using that. There's definitely, actually I'll just bring that up again quickly. I want to show you something. With your low end of your track, and I'm pretty sure I've seen this on another video on YouTube about how to mix your low end, and I'm sure I've done something similar to it on my own mixes, but I tend to look at the low end on my, let me just get my bass and move it over here. So if I get my bass and my kick, I'll just close that off. So my bass and my kick, right? If I'm hitting 0 dB, then I know that I'm at the right level before clipping, because if you can see down here on this console down here, I'll just highlight that for you. So you can see there that this console is reading out that I'm approximately -18. So that's thinking of -18 in the digital realm, but this readout here is thinking -18 in the analog realm. So that's kind of a way that you can set headroom safely, I guess you can say, setting headroom safely so that when it comes down to your final mix, then you know you've got a lot of set headroom to play with when it comes down to mastering and limiting your track. So that's I guess if you're using trap, hip hop, whatever it might be for that matter, if you're using that kind of monitoring system to get your final mix, then it will give you a good basis to have a mastering session once the track's finally mixed, and then you've got plenty of headroom. So you probably have about, say this whole mix, I'll just play it out. So I mean it's somewhere about, okay, so it's about -13, and we've got heaps and heaps of headroom for days. So that's, I mean, that's a good way of thinking about it. So if you always set this to -18 and you want to have a lot of headroom, that's good. One good way of doing it. There's other metering tools now. For example, I tend to use the metering tool that is in Isotope. Where is it? So Isotope Ozone 6. I use this for mastering a lot, so I tend to use the metering tools in that. And the good way to, I mean, it's showing you there where I'm at.
We gon' live it out, 44th Street. We gon' shout it out, 44th Street.
So that gives you a good indication as to where you're at, especially the way that I've set this up with the metering is pretty much telling me, actually I'll just show you how I've done it. So if you have this program, I'm not sure if you have Ozone 5, you can do the same thing in that. I'll just double check, but anyway, pretty sure you can. So I've set this source up to mid side, so I can see my middle channel and the side channels at the same time, so it gives me a good indication of that. It also gives me an indication of RMS and peak. So the differences between the RMS and the peak, now as you probably saw on the channel, the peak is where this is peaking at. The constant is the RMS down here. So if I just change the hold time, so you can see the hold time, but down here is the constant RMS and the peak is this -15 little peak symbol there. So that's pretty much what you want to look for. The constant is pretty much the indicator of how loud your track's going to sound in the end process when you're mastering it. The peak is what's going to hit your limiter at the first instance. So say for example my kick is the loudest thing in my setup here. So say that the kick is the loudest in the mix. Obviously the kick's going to hit at -15. So when you start to bring down the limiter when you're mixing or you're mastering the track, so if you're bringing down the limiter, you're increasing the threshold, you're increasing the loudness, and this is the threshold here. So the ceiling is where that kick will end up hitting, and the limiter is, the threshold is bringing down the level, and then it ends up maximizing that volume. And I won't do it because I'm going to blow your ears out if I turn this up, but just so you understand, when you're using that limiter, that's what you're going to increase the threshold until it hits the ceiling. So basically, if you just imagine, sorry, my bad, turn that off. So if you just imagine that's hitting the ceiling and the ceiling's up here at -0.03 dB, then you're going to understand that that's going to increase the volume to that level. And that's another story altogether. Probably another video. I might just do separate limiter video. Okay, so let me just get to the other part of that question that you had about how do you understand what instruments need to sit where in the mix, and I guess the loudness of each instrument and the perspective of how that sounds. So if you're going to look at that, so I'll just remove these altogether, so we're not messing with anything in my mix. Alright, so we'll keep this open just so you can see that for a whole time and you know exactly where I'm at. Another meter I'll just show you as well that I use. Where is it? If you have Logic, by the way, Logic's got a really good meter for metering. It's a new addition to one of their metering systems that they got. What am I looking for? Level meter. There we go. Okay, so I tend to use either of these in my mixing just to see where I'm at. There's so much to do with metering that, you know, you could spend days on this stuff, but I'll set this at maybe I'll set it at K14. Alright, so actually I'll just set that at peak. Alright, cool. So we'll set that at peak, and I'll explain that in another thing. I just want to have another separate video about metering, but this pretty much, I either set one of these two meters up just so I know what I'm looking at. Now this is obviously telling me the peaks, so it's not all that convenient to know your peaks, but a K system metering is more accurate than the loudness, and it's a little bit, shows you kind of where the dynamic range is on the track as well. But that's another thing altogether. Anyway, so with the metering, right, so you can use that metering system there, and you don't have to put it on the individual tracks because you've got metering here along your mixer, so you can quite easily see, you know, how loud your tracks are with that, all those metering there. Now, what I would start to do in your mix before you do anything, say you've dropped all your tracks in from whatever you're using, say it's FL Studio or it's Logic or whatever it is, and you decide to mix it in Studio One or you want to mix it in Logic, it doesn't matter, whichever you use. I like Studio One because you can do certain things like clip gain, which this is basically possible to do it on all tracks. So you could get that, and you can bring down your levels just like that. So just imagine that you're looking at your levels prior to them entering this console. That's basically what this clip gain does. So it removes a volume level from the pre-track before your mixer. Now, as you were saying before in your question about setting your mixing channels all to unity, that's what I like to do. I like to always set them to unity because, especially later on when it comes into the mixing phase, that you can have all your tracks playing and all of these faders haven't been affected yet. So say you want to bring down the volume of one thing and then you want to increase the volume of another. I would start at having the levels set unity, like I said, and then increasing or decreasing the volume of certain tracks when you start the mixing process. So as I was saying before, I send this straight into mono the first thing I do when I start mixing, because when you listen to the things in stereo, it does play with your perception, and it does interfere, especially in a room like what I've got here. It's terrible. So acoustically, you don't want to have things bouncing off the walls and things playing with other phase issues that might occur in the room, especially with low end. You just want to have a clear signal and have your mixer set to quite a low volume. Right now I've got mine set so it's reasonably low. The signal that I'm playing right now is quite low anyway, so it's not like it's going to be blasting me. But one thing I learned from a pro who mixes his tracks for, I'm pretty sure, Eminem or 50 Cent or whoever it is, I watched one of their YouTube videos, and they were talking about how they like to use one, I think it's a mono speaker that they had, and they had it at really low volume. And I started to think, why do they mix at such low volume? And I realized that when they were talking, that they were saying that your ears compress certain levels of sound themselves. When the volume's loud, your ears have a built-in compressor which will level the volume. But when you have low volume, there's no need for your ears to compress per se the sound that's coming in, and it can hear all the sound naturally, and the dynamic range which is in your music, you can hear that at a more accurate level when the levels are low. So basically, I mix my tracks, for one, in mono so it doesn't interfere with the stereo field, and secondly, I listen to it at quite a low volume. And this does take training, and it takes time to listen to things at low volume, because most people like to hear their music loud and they want to get that whole groove on, and they want to understand how it's going to sound in a nightclub or wherever they're going to play their music. And that's all fine and good, but if you're coming into the mix with that perception, you're going to come into it and you're going to start cranking the low end or the high end, and you're going to start making the track sound like it's not good at all. Like you'll have way too much low end or way too much high end. And I found when I first started mixing, my high end, my top end stuff was just like ear piercing. Now when I listen to it, I'm like, what was I thinking? But but now, like, I understand that I was doing it because I was compensating for things in my room that I didn't realize, and especially for the fact that I was listening to the track. I was producing the track, and then I was going straight into the mix, and I was trying to tweak it and mix it and make it sound good. But then at that point, my ears were already fatigued, so there was no point of me even mixing the track. So I will produce a track like you saw in Maschine. I'll produce a certain track like that, and once I've got the track how I want it to sound to a degree, I'll probably leave that track alone for at least a day before my ears just recover and get over the sound of that track. Maybe even a week before I touch that again. I might just go back to it in a week and then listen to it and think, okay, this needs to be tweaked, this needs to be tweaked, and I'll write down notes, or I'll mentally record that in my mind and think about what I need to tweak about that track, and then I'll do that later. Now, as you can see, this is the project, and it lines up pretty much key into what we've got here. Like I was saying before, I've got the project lined up with I'll just turn this on so it moves with it. So it lines up with the same setup in my track, so I know exactly where I'm at, and that's just one good thing of doing with the plugin. Now, getting back to the whole mixing and the reasons behind levels in your track. So the first thing I normally start with, and this is no set rule by all means, it's not a rule at all, but the first thing I'd normally start with is my drums. Now, I'd set the drums in a fashion that sounds clear, kind of punchy in that sense, and probably one of the louder things in the mix. But then the other thing is you got to remember the dynamic range of, say for example, this sample. Okay, so as you can see, there's quite a bit of dynamic range. It goes from about -30 to -17 or so. So that tells you that there is some room for compression within that dynamic range. You could definitely probably compress some of that out if you wanted to. But it does come down to what do you want to sound dynamic and what do you want to sound compress. And normally, most times, it's probably the drums you want to sound somewhat compressed and glued together and fixed together. And that goes along with all the mix as well. You don't want to leave sections of your mix that sound like they're not meant to be out there, like they're sticking out of the mix, or they just don't sound like they're glued together with the mix. And I tend to use bus compression to try and defeat the whole issue with having things, I guess, sounding not cohesive. Now, if you're using Studio One and you're using the standard compressors in there, like I said before, you can use the basic compressor that comes with it. So that's this compressor here. And by all means, you can set this compressor up to make it sound really clear and really precise. And I can show you a quick way of setting this up right now. Okay, so you can see that I haven't really done much with this compressor, right? So it depends on how you really want to set this up, but you could set this up similar to an SSL style compressor if you wanted to. So you could set the attack to say 30 milliseconds, and you could set the release to whatever time you want, or you could do an auto release and auto attack. Adaptive just means it's basically adaptive to the signal. So you could set that the way you want, set the threshold so it's just grabbing the point there where you're getting a tiniest little bit of compression. Or you could pull that down all the way. Look, at honestly, when you're coming to bus compression, less is more. And that's what I've discovered, especially further on, the more I do mixing, the more I understand compression. It's just that, you know, you don't want to do a whole lot of compression on your bus with one compressor. You're probably better off to spread it through multiple compressors, and that's what I have started to do with my mixes, and it's just helped my mixes tremendously because, you know, if you're looking at the dynamic range, which I'll just show you another metering tool that I like to use, the Spectra Meter. Let me just move this in a way that you can see it along the grid. Move that down. Okay. So Spectrum Analyzer is probably really good. It's good to get used to these actually, all these 3 meters. If you have those, you probably won't go wrong in your mix for most part anyway. But what you're probably best to do is understand what your mix is like without low end in it. So say for example, muting the kick, muting the bass, sorry. So as you can see, there's still quite a bit of low end in this track without me even introducing the bass or the kick. And the same goes with the bass instrument. It's got quite a bit of low end, and it still does have some top end, but predominantly a low end here. And the bulk of the frequencies, let me just make this larger so you can see what I'm talking about. So the bulk of the frequencies there are hitting about minus 36 dB max, probably close to it anyway. A good way to know is to put a long hold on that, and it will hold the frequency at that level, and it'll tell you kind of where you were at. So if I put the kick and the bass together, just so you can see, and that gives you a great indication of, you know, how much level that you're increasing just by adding the kick and the bass together. So I mean, so pretty much down here you can see there's a little bit of top end frequencies and they're sticking out a bit. But as you can see, it gradually increases towards the low end, and that's where the frequencies really reside. Now, looking at that, that's one good indicator to tell you, you know, where you want your sections of the mix to fit. So, I mean, if you think about it in a box sense or the scenario, and you want to understand how much headroom you've got left, kind of just look at the low end, because generally, especially with trap music and hip-hop music, the low end is really the driving force for a lot of the track. There is top end frequencies, of course, but the low end is generally the most driving force on that. The other thing you probably want to look at is where is it? A phase meter. So this is really good to have that open and this open as well. And I guess, you know, by all means, you don't have to have every single one of these things open every single time you do a mix, but it definitely does help you understand, you know, where your mix is really sitting, and it does give you an indication, you know, in the short term at least, when you start to train your ears and start to hear frequencies and understand where they sit in the mix, then you'll start to know, you know, where you should have certain things. But before that happens, it's good to have meters to give you, you know, a real good indication as to, one, where your phase is sitting. So the correlation meter down here tells you where your phase is, and if it's all the way to the right, then you know you're in phase. Now if it's coming to the left, the correlation is in minus, so that means there's phase issues. As you can see, pretty much everything right now is in mono, but when I introduce the sample, it's stereo, but it's quite spread over the stereo spectrum, so you can pretty much see that. If I can just make this bigger, so that's spread a lot over the stereo field, and that gives you an idea of where your instruments are sitting in the mix, and what you want to do with them is totally how up to your discretion. But you know, when it comes down to having headroom, it does also affect where the position of your certain instruments are. So say you have a kick and a bass, and you have some other thing sitting in the middle field, so you've got everything in mono with the kick and the bass, right? Then you're going to be taking certain frequencies away from, say, your vocal, or say the piano, or whatever that instrument that sits in a certain field. So the Spectra Meter here, say you've got your vocal sitting somewhere in the 1K, 2K, 3K, 5K range. A vocal does sit lower or down. Like you can see with my vocal here, I'll just play that on its own.
44th Street.
That's got a lot of spread on that vocal. Now you can see there's a lot of low end here, and later on when it comes down to it, I'll probably take out some of that low end that I don't need. But just to show you the evidence that a vocal has pretty much spread of the entire spectrum. And then you got to think about, you know, where is my kick going to sit? Where is my bass going to sit?
We gon' live it out, 44th Street. We gon' shout it out, 44th Street.
So, excuse me. So thinking in that mindset, you know, you have to think about the whole mixing process as one giant box, and think about the things you want to put into that box, and think about things you want to take out of that box, and only a certain amount of stuff is going to fit in that hypothetical box, and that's what you've got to decide when you're mixing your track, is where do you want certain things to sit? Where are they going to sit inside the box? Are they going to be to the right, to the left, or to the center, or do you want them to come from behind to a degree? Like, where is it that you want that sound to be sitting? So I guess when you're thinking about certain things, especially when you're going to have rap tracks or trap or whatever music it is that you're creating, you want to think about where is certain things going to be. You know, are you going to have a singer on that track? And if so, Are they going to be able to be heard over certain instruments? Are they going to be stolen frequencies by other louder instruments or higher end frequency instruments? Like, say for example, in this track at the start, I've got a police siren. Now, funnily enough, the police siren has, let me just move this down, has mostly top end frequencies here, but they are top end frequencies that sit in this spectrum of where you would probably see a vocal sitting as well. And there is other things like a piano. I may just turn that up a bit so you can hear it. So as you can see, the piano, it does have low end frequencies. It's pretty much spread over the whole entire thing, and that's basically the same kind of frequencies that you saw with the vocal as well. So that's everything. You just want to look out for that sort of stuff. Just wanted to give you an indication so you know kind of where to start with your mix and where you want certain things to sit in that area. So I might take you through, I guess, this small pre-mixing video and just give you an indication of what I do, and I'll just start that out. So I'll just play the track. I just want to see what it sounds like, and I'll just see where in that mix that I need to start editing things.
gon' live it out, 44th Street. We gon' shout it out, 44th Street. We gon' be about what you gon' do. It's 44th now, 44th Street. We gon' live it out, 44th Street. We gon' shout it out, 44th Street. We gon' be about what you gon' do. It's 44th now.
So kind of give you an idea of like the things that I look for when I'm doing a mix. So in my studio room, I've got a sub underneath my desk, so it does tell me a lot of the low end frequencies, and it doesn't hide the fact that there's some flabbiness to some of the low end frequencies. So when I'm listening for that, so what I generally would do, as you can see with this EQ, you can do certain things with it, and it is handy. But it's not the EQ that I usually go to, but it is definitely usable if you want to use it. It's quite a good EQ. I use this mostly for taming top end frequencies, or sometimes adding low end frequencies or decreasing low end frequencies, depending on what the mix needs. But The EQ that I tend to use a lot, and most of the time I go to this EQ just for this reason, because it has this feature that you can isolate the frequencies like that, and it's really quick to be able to find the frequencies that you don't like and isolate them and then reduce them, obviously, or increase the ones that you do. So I tend to do that a lot, and this is the EQ that I would normally use for that sort of thing. So if you're looking for a good EQ that can do stuff like that, and it has lots of different features in this EQ, like a transient designer and an exciter, dynamic, compression. It's got 2 of the compressors that you can use, a de-esser, and I was actually going to do another video just on separately on de-essing, because de-essing is magic. Sometimes you can just do so much with it, and it's not just for vocals. And it has a limiter as well, and a bypass, obviously, and it has different presets. I tend not to use presets too much on this though. But anyway, let me just show you kind of where I would start the whole process of mixing. As you saw, I would just listen for certain things in my kick, for example. I'll just remove that now, just so you know. And remove, man, come on. And I'll just introduce this as my EQ for the kick. So 2 things that I do with low end, you're going to see in just a second. Now, I normally raise 2 separate EQs, and that way I can see exactly what's going on with the low end in my track, and then I can start to alter it to make it sound cohesive and together. Now, normally there's a good way of doing this, and that's solo your kick and your bass. There's another thing to adding vocals to this later, and I might do something else with that in another video, but I'll just show you for the most part the start of the mixing process, and let's get into that now. Alright, so that pretty much tells me, might just put that on a longer hold time. Okay, so that's pretty much telling me, you know, where my bass and my kick are sitting. So as you can see, they're very much in similar positions. So, you know, one has to compromise the other. They both can't be in the mix at the same levels, otherwise the mix is going to be too loud and it'll sound completely distorted because of the fact that there's just too much low end in the mix. So when I'm looking for this, I want to see what is it that I'm featuring and what is it that I'm removing. Normally the kick I want to try and feature unless the kick isn't the predominant thing in the mix. So I would then look at this and say, okay, this kick, some of the frequencies probably could come out. Now, cycle between the 2, so when you're doing this, you know that what you're doing is actually sounding good, and it's not just, you know, tricking you to sound good, but then really when you come to the end of it, it sounds like garbage. So always cycle. So to me, that sounds like the flabbiness of the bass. Now, you probably want to listen to really on a really good pair of headphones so you can hear it. But to me, that sounds like the flabbiness of the kick has now been removed. And that's kind of the key to getting your kick to stick out a bit more. The same applies to when you have top end in your mix. Say, for example, you have too much top end and you want to reduce that. You can definitely do that with, say, a high shelf. Could be an analog. This has just got different types of shelves, so vintage is like that. And there is a resonant which gives you that curve filter, which resonates a certain frequency that you're reducing below the one that you've got. I tend to use something like an analog shelf just because that's more natural, and it gives you some sort of frequencies at the bottom there. You don't want to, you know, using complete, where is it? Trying to find it. Like a brick wall limiter, they tend to sound and, you know, they create issues with phase in your mix, and that's kind of why I don't use them too much unless I really have to. And in that case, you know, like, you can use it, there's no issue with using it, but as long as you're watching the phase on your track, especially with your kick. So for example, I've got that on the kick, so the phase is fine because it's a mono track at this stage, but I always just want to listen to what that does to the actual track itself without, you know, thinking, oh, I'm removing these frequencies, but I might actually still need those frequencies later on in the mix, or I might not need them at all and I can remove them. So just to get things sounding more natural, I kind of just tend to use like a high shelf analog filter like that, so I can just shelf out some of the frequencies but keep some of the natural sounding frequencies down there still. And you can reduce it as much as you want. 10, minus 10, I think it goes even further, minus 30 if you wanted to, but I think minus 10 is probably a safe bet on most chances. Alright, so I mean that's a good idea to start like that. And I'll just show you, I'll remove this and solo the kick. So you can hear right there, it's got a weird boxy sound. And even there. So the sounds that you're looking for when you're trying to mix certain things is to get rid of the sounds that sound unnatural, I guess, in that sense, and the sounds that you think will be annoying to your ears later on. And especially when you're doing reductive EQ, it's really helpful in the long run because you're starting to create more headroom for other things that can sit in that section. Like I said, with the Spectra Meter, you're creating more space where you want certain things to sit. So basically, what I would try and do is not so much on a kick, because you really want to get your kick at the start. However you've created your kick, you might stack samples, you might find a kick that you already like and you don't have to touch it at all. It might sound clear and crisp and all that good stuff. But in certain times you might get a kick that you might not like the sound of, and you might want to edit it with EQ, or you might want to add some more bass to it in whatever way that you want to edit that kick. But the main thing is that, like I said, you want your kick and your bass to sit right. And in this particular track, I have a lot of low end in my sample, so I don't want that to be overwhelming the rest of the track. So what I would generally do probably on that sense is just make sure that my EQ alright, so as you can see, I'll just put a VU hold on that. See, I did a top end brick wall on that, and you can see it's cut off right there, and that removed some of the annoying frequencies that were on my sample that I had. I didn't like those frequencies, and I really felt like they were ear piercing, and I just wanted to get rid of them. So, you know, I'll play this as a full mix, and I'll just show you how I would think about this when I'm doing the mix. I'll just play it in stereo so you can hear it. And then in mono. So looking at a low shelf, sorry. High pass shelf, there we go. Alright, so see, what you're trying to do is, you know, once you've got your levels set, so these levels are pretty much set in this track, and I'm just trying to edit the mix now. So how I would get my levels to be sitting right, back to that original, I guess, question that you had is, you know, look at each individual track And just remember that bass, like I said earlier, bass is going to steal a lot of frequencies in the end. So sometimes if you have issues with your bass being too loud, you might notice that other things aren't sounding right in the mix. So I tend to sit my bass somewhere around about at least minus 24 as a max, and then I build from there. So if I got my kick, and that's getting up to about minus 15 or minus, yeah, it's minus 18 at this stage. So minus 18, and that kind of, to me, they kind of sit right at this point. Once I've got those two sitting right without any compression at all, then I'll start to add compression. And the reason why I do this without compression is so I'm not interfering with the way that the kick and the bass are sitting. If you start to interfere with it early, before compression, if you add compression in, I should say, and then you start mixing into that compressor with the two things there, that's not wrong to do that at all. But I find that it sounds clear if I've got it without a compressor first, and then I'll add a compressor into the mix later on. So let me just add a Waves compressor just to show you, because this compressor is sometimes really cheap on the Waves website, and I actually really like the sound of this compressor. So let me just go for 1.5 roughly, and I'll just take off the analog altogether, leave the output at 0 at this stage, and just start with compression. Alright, so what did I do then? Basically, I set a compressor to give me the ratio of 1.55, whatever that works out to be, 1.5, I guess you could look at it as. And then I pulled the threshold all the way down to minus 48. If you can see there, it's got a minus 48 on this compressor, and that is set to quite a low level. And the reason why I was talking about this VU meter earlier at minus 18 is because that compressor is still going to be affected by that input signal at that level. So the great thing about this compressor is you can set the release time to be the same as your host or your DAW, which I find really convenient to have a compressor set to the same BPM speed or release time as the actual project that I'm working on. It just seems to really suit the mix a lot better, and I'll show you what I mean. See, that sounds flabby, it doesn't sound like it's supposed to. Setting it to the host. Alright, so to me that sounds like the compressor's just touching it, and that's excuse me, that's pretty much what you want at the first compression level. So on bus compression, your first compressor that you put on there, whatever that compressor might be, you don't want the compressor to be working overtime, you just want it to be just slightly touching the signal. So like a tiniest little bit of compression I use on the first compressor as a bus compressor. Now from this point forward, I'll leave that compressor alone, I don't touch it. And I'll start to mix into that compressor as the idea of having compression at that stage. So let me just start soloing certain instruments to see where they fit.
It's 44th now, 44th Street. We gon' live it out, 44th Street. We gon' shout it out, 44th Street. We gon' be about what you gon' do. It's 44th now, 44th Street. We gon' live it out, 44th Street. We gon' shout.
Alright, so as you can see, it's like magic. You pretty much listen to every single thing come into the track. So what you're trying to think about is, where do you want all of that to sit? The main thing obviously is the vocal, because the vocal, at the end of the day, the vocal is the most important part of the whole entire mix. This video is getting on in time, so I don't want to go too much longer, but I tend to mix the track just like that. And as you can see, when I brought down the faders just slightly, it all started to sit in really well into the mix. And then I found that everything just really felt glued together. And at the end of it, I'm getting about -1, -1.5 dB roughly on this meter. That's hardly anything, but it's just enough to make it sound glued together. You can see the spectrum here. Looks like a ski slope, and that's kind of what you want, especially with a hip-hop track. You don't want, whoa, you don't want the, where's my meter again? You don't want this to be like too high up in the top end frequencies, and there's one good reason for that, and that is basically that top end frequencies, or higher end frequencies within the frequency spectrum, are perceivably louder to your ear than low end frequencies are. If the low end frequencies are overpowering, obviously you're not going to hear a lot, because at the end of the day, when you start to compress this and crush it, the low end frequencies are going to affect your compressor the most. There are ways to work around that, but at this stage you want things to sort of be slightly like a ski slope, a downhill setup, but not too much so that you can't hear the top end, but just so everything sits really glued together, fixed together, and is cohesive. That's the kind of thing that I look for in most things when I start to mix my tracks, especially if I have vocals in there that I can mix pre that. If I don't have vocals, just think about it as if you were going to have vocals in there. And then, you know, go along, add some EQ into it, add some compression, whatever suits to your track. You know, it comes down to whatever's tasteful in the end. It doesn't have to be perfect. By all means, you know, in the day that in the 80s when they were making rap records, if you go back and listen to them, they're not mixed 100% perfect. I can tell you by that. Because if you listen to the tracks now, especially with the clarity of the tracks, they didn't sound anything like that. But people didn't care about so much the mix of the track. They cared about the content that was on the track. And that's the mindset you've got to come to when you're mixing a track. You've got to think about the fact that who's going to listen to this track? What is the end result, and where are they going to take the track? You know, what are they going to think about the actual lyrical content, the emotional side of the track? Think about the emotional connection that somebody's going to have to the music. All of these things are things you got to think about when you're mixing. But the main thing is that you want the track to sound clear, you want it to sound cohesive, you want it to sound like it's an actual mix that's really glued together, that somebody can listen to and enjoy. But at the end of the day, it's your music, it's your creative style. Whatever that style is, you know, you want to keep that in your mix. You don't want to lose your style. And that's part of having originality in your tracks. But I hope that this video is helpful to you, and I hope this video teaches you a little bit about mixing. I might do another follow-up video on how I mix this entire track. Just do a 1 hour special of just mixing this track. Hopefully I didn't bore the crap out of you in doing this, but there's just so much to explain in so little time that it needs to be broken up in separate videos, and I hope that I can do that, and I hope that you guys can learn something from this. So without further ado, I hope you guys all enjoyed this, and peace!